Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us to our press conference, The Future of Food Next Steps, organized by 50 by 40. We have a really great panel of speakers for you, starting with, to my extreme right is Lasee Bruun, CEO of 50 by 40. To his left is Brent Loken, Global Food Lead Scientist for the WWF. And to his left is Oluwatosin Ogunsola. He's with YOUNGO, the Agricultural Working Group. And I'm Naomi Prasad, Comms Lead at 50 by 40. So how this press conference will go is that I will ask questions to all of the speakers, and they will come in with their views on the question, and then we'll progress to the next question. We will, of course, have time for any questions from the audience at the end of those questions. So the first question is that we're witnessing an unprecedented focus on food at COP, which should be translated into action at a national level. What steps need to be taken to include food systems change as a core part of NDCs? Would you like to go, Brent?
Yeah, I mean, what you mentioned in terms of seeing an unprecedented focus on food systems, I think cannot be overlooked. You know, with all the craziness here at COP and everything happening, I mean, this is the first time that there's been so much focus on food systems at so many levels. There's a number of food systems, events, pavilions. It's being discussed within the Cornivia, and I think you can speak to that a bit more. There was an ICANN initiative that was just launched between GAIN, WHO, and others, which is an integration of nutrition and climate change and health. The FAST initiative was launched. So there's been an unprecedented number of food-related initiatives that have been launched, and I think we should applaud that because it's never happened before. Food has been, very much ignored. However, as you say, we have to turn towards the implementation side of things. And we have to say, fine, we have these initiatives, we have these, things on the ground of food, but now we have to translate them to action. And that is the real next step in terms of how we make sure, in terms of how this plays out in countries around the world. And that's something where we really need to turn our attention to immediately following COP, because all these initiatives, all these implementations of different things will look very differently in every single country. And we need to start wrapping our heads around the fact in terms of how it plays out in places like Zambia versus places like Brazil or the US or Europe or in Asia. And that's really like the next step that we have to take.
Thank you, Brent. Dr. Ould-Dada has just joined us, so I'll repeat the question so that you can come in as well. We're witnessing an unprecedented focus on food at COP, which should be translated into action at a national level. What steps need to be taken to include food systems change as a core part of NDCs?
Good morning, and thank you very much for this opportunity. And in fact, we're really very pleased of the attention that is being given to agri-food systems in general at this COP. And I think it's about time really to see and to recognize that food and agriculture are absolutely an essential part of the solution to this climate crisis, because they have a lot to offer in terms of efficiency, for mitigation, but also for building adaptation and resilience, especially for vulnerable countries and vulnerable communities such as farmers and smallholder farmers. So I think that the main thing is that this focus is a really very good start, because we are running out of time, basically. We left it so late really to respond to climate change that we have no option, no choice but to adapt to the new reality. And this is where agriculture is critical, because it affects our global food security. So the response now we've seen is very encouraging in bringing adaptation at the level of mitigation, if it's not even more. Because we've been focusing so much on mitigation or reducing emissions that we've almost forgotten about the fact that actually adaptation is a critical part of addressing the overall climate crisis. And just to finish, particularly from FAO's perspective, and apologies again for being late, because I've just been at an event where we launch our new strategy on climate change, which as one of its focus is really the local level, is to work more with farmers, with local communities in deploying these solutions that we do have. We do have the solutions. We want to focus more on innovation also going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Lasee, would you like to come in on the question?
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks for being here today, and thanks for having me as well. Following from what Brent and Dr. Dada said, I think it's absolutely important that we look at the differentiated approach to how we address the food system and how we work in the intersectionality of food and climate, both on adaptation, mitigation, as resilience, as was pointed out already. And I think the important part is to look at the different ways we engage in different countries. It is very region specific, and I know that Brent has been working a lot specifically on the differences and the comparabilities of different countries, so you don't need to do all countries in the world, but can find common denominators. But I think one thing that's crucial here is that when you look at the problems we're facing, and you might have heard the word polycrisis. Some of you might not have heard it, some of you have heard it so many times you get sick of it, but be prepared to hear it much, much more, because we are in a polycrisis. You know, there's biodiversity extinction, there's rampant hunger. Look at the Horn of Africa. Look at the way food is being produced, or it's essentially not being produced, particularly in places like here in the MENA region, drought-ridden, lots of problems with irrigation, lots of problems with getting crops to grow. All these things are coming together and creating climate change while failing to feed people. But the important part is that we change things around and ensure we can actually have policies put in place. And one of the first things, to your question, one of the first things we need to do is to ensure that food and food systems become a core part of the NDCs, of the national climate change plans, because right now food is very, if at all, hardly mentioned in any of the NDCs. And as long as that doesn't become a core part of the national climate change mitigation and adaptation plans for respective countries, we're not really going to make it. Then it's just going to be a lot of fake promises and talk that doesn't lead to concrete actions. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Lasee. I'll move on to the next question. Why has it taken so long to get the food agenda firmly on the table at COP, and how do we maintain the momentum? I'd like to address this first to Oluwatosin. Would you like to take that question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think what we were able to, everyone here on this table and everyone in the room is able to agree on the concept that food is essential in the discussion, and it connects us together, and it's also a requisite for us to attain sustainable futures. So I think the next steps and the way forward is if we're able to collaborate together and then mount prayer and make our parties to see the need and necessity, the urgency of what we are discussing, food, or the urgency of some of these issues that are being highlighted, and they being able to come at a roundtable discussion and be able to negotiate and bring out conclusions and results for us to be able to implement at the national level. Because this is key for us as in this COP, the COP for implementation. And this is one of the things we need to be able to take out of COP for us to be able to say, yes, this COP is a success.
Dr. Ould-Dada, would you like to come in on that question?
Yes, thank you for the question. Why it's taken so long? I think sometimes you need some new events and some circumstances that re-emphasizes the importance of food and agriculture in relation to climate change. So we've seen the effect of the pandemic and the ongoing impact of climate change. We've seen also the ongoing impact of the loss of biodiversity and then the war in Ukraine. And all these have actually shown how vulnerable the agri-food systems are to these shocks, to these crises. So it's not too late, obviously. I mean, the timing is good in a sense that now we realize the urgency of looking at agri-food systems in this context of deploying solutions to these crises. And I think this is what we need to focus on now. How do we maintain momentum? Well, I think now we have so much attention on this agenda that is definitely going to be taken forward to the next COP and beyond. But I don't think we need to wait for COPs to obviously act on the transformation of the agri-food systems. This is something that we need to do as fast as possible because it affects everyone. Global food security matters to everyone. It affects everyone, particularly those the most vulnerable. So what we need to do in maintaining momentum, well, not just maintaining momentum, but to really scaling up the solutions that we have, the innovation that we have, so that all the communities benefit from these solutions, from the best practices that have been tested in some settings and some locations. And I'm talking particularly about the climate smart agriculture, adaptation to the new reality, as I said earlier. So it's not just maintaining momentum, it's doing more and faster, really faster and at a bigger scale.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could jump in on this one too. I mean, I think that we didn't have the evidence up until this point about the impact of food systems. And, a lot of the work had been done on transport and energy systems and the other sectors. And it's really been a tremendous amount of work and research that has come out over the last 5 years or so that is really demonstrating that there's a clear and present danger coming from food systems, and they have so much potential to be part of the solution. And finally, right now we've got this evidence, and now we just need to make sure that we act on it immediately instead of having that very long delay between information and action like we did for the other sectors. And this is something that has to happen now.
Lasee, would you like to come in? Thank you, Brent.
Yes, thank you. I think just most of the background for why it took so long has been touched upon. I just wanted to talk briefly about the momentum issue. And I think it's so crucial that we keep strengthening the collaboration between the energy and the food sectors, because up until now it has been seen as being quite detached from each other. And the nexus we really need to be looking at, I think, is the nexus between food, energy, and development work. Because unfortunately, there is a link between those countries that are suffering the most from climate change, who didn't cause it, also the ones who are suffering the most from undernutrition and hunger. So there is a good opportunity here to really build stronger bridges with the development work, and not just the short-term hunger alleviation, but enabling new food systems and new ways of producing food in countries that are in need of that. So to keep the momentum, I think we need to have a much stronger unified approach across the different sectors.
Thank you, Lasee. My next question is, what countries are best suited to lead a food systems change that addresses climate change adaptation and mitigation simultaneously? Who carries the responsibility? In case someone wants to jump in, or I'll pick someone. Brent, would you like to take it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question because the food system is so interconnected. Yeah. All countries lean on each other. So it's really hard to say which country shares the most responsibility. When you look at, for example, greenhouse gas emissions from consumption patterns, there are definitely some countries, mainly G20 countries, that have significantly higher greenhouse gas emissions than others. And when we're talking about things like dietary shifts and these very specific actions that should be taken in different places, it doesn't look the same in all countries. So some countries are going to have to shift their diets a lot more dramatically than others. There are a lot of countries around the world that are still facing significant burdens of undernutrition, and greenhouse gas emissions might have to increase from the food systems in those particular countries, and that's something that we're going to have to deal with. You know, it is this giant global jigsaw puzzle in terms of really trying to figure out what's happening in what country, and having a better understanding of that moving forward is absolutely, very, very important.
Thank you, Brent. Dr. Ould-Dada, would you like to come in on that?
Yes, sure. It's clear that it's the responsibility of everyone. I mean, and as I said, food concerns everyone. I don't think we need to put the responsibility just on a particular community or particular part of society. It's an issue that we all need to work on together and look at the issues that are pressing, that we really need to deal with first. And I'll give you an example. The food loss and waste is a massive issue, that we're still throwing food away and wasting it, while on the other hand we have 828 million people who go hungry every day. So, you know, part of the transformation of fixing the agri-food systems is looking at the things that we all, as people, as you know, consumers, we need to think about and stop throwing food away. So it is the responsibility of everyone. And what that means also is that we need to rethink our connection with food. We need to change our mindset. And actually not only in relation to food, but to natural resources in general, because we are still wasting food and water and energy as well. So I think the way we use natural resources is definitely something that has a huge potential for efficiency and rethinking our responsibility of how we use these resources that can help address the issues of climate change, the biodiversity crisis, and the sustainability that we want. You know, if we really care about the sustainable development goals and the need to achieve them for us and for future generations to come, then the responsibility is with everyone, and it starts with us as individuals.
Thank you. Oluwatosin, would you like to share your thoughts on the question?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely with what has been submitted, the statements that have been made. And I feel because of the central role food plays in all our lives, and now we're looking at 9 billion population by 2050, I think it's high time we put food on the burner for us to be able to have an integrated system in which we're able to discuss all the aspects that food covers. Because once we're able to have something to work with in terms of food, then we would be able to attain the sustainable future we are looking forward to. We understand the role of behavioral change in some of these things, and we also understand the place of advocacy and capacity building to be able to push forward some of these food agendas for us to be able to deliver on the implementation goals that we have. So it is very important and necessary for us to keep the momentum strong and keep pushing forward, as we also look at some of our NDCs at the national level to also incorporate all of these ways in which food contributes to the emissions, because to a large extent, discussion is going around on indigenous foods and all, and we see the role it can also play. Some of this knowledge can also play a role in helping us to be able to connect people with the environment and eat nutritious food. Thank you.
Maybe I could just very briefly just come in on this. Just to say, we talked a lot about production here, and I very much agree with Brent. It's difficult to find the leaders and laggards because everything is inextricably linked. But one other link we have to address is also on the consumption side. You know, for us to have equitable food distribution, we have to address the overconsumption of food, in particular in the G20 countries, and how that it is linked to undernutrition in these developed countries. There is a link, as pointed out in the latest IPCC report, and we cannot continue having this excess of consumption in the global north while trying to feed the rest of the world. There needs to be a leveling out.
100% support that. That's a very important point. Thanks, Lasee.
All right, with that, I will move to our next question. What steps need to be taken leading up to COP28 to ensure we facilitate and fund a just agricultural and livestock transition, as well as agroecological practices and sustainable, healthy food systems? If you could take that, please, Dr. Ould-Dada first.
Okay, well, I think the steps to COP28 are to build on this really promising momentum that we've seen now in this COP, in highlighting the importance of the agri-food systems and the solutions we want to see coming out from this. The focus now has to be really on looking at what we can do in the ground, in reality, to have more projects, more support to countries and to farmers, and that's how we're going to see the difference. And I think that's where the focus needs to be, is really on more practical things that we can do on the ground. As I said earlier, we know what needs to be done. I don't think we need to continue talking about that for so long, but let's get on with it and start doing more collaboration, more partnerships in implementing things on the ground, in having more solutions on the ground. And I think that's the critical things going forward to COP28 and beyond, and the faster the better.
Thank you. I'll address my last question to Brent. We only have a few minutes left. Why is it important to focus on food systems and the agroecological approach versus merely food security? And what do those two approaches entail?
If we don't use a food systems approach, we cannot achieve the Paris Agreement. I mean, it's as simple as that. You know, when we look at the impact and the scale of food systems and the overall contribution that comes from it, if we continue to ignore it, the food systems by themselves will consume the entire budget left for carbon between now and 2050 will come just from food systems. Even if we tackle every single other sector and achieve all our goals, food systems alone will consume the entire budget. So that's why we have to look at all aspects. We have to talk about food loss and waste. We have to talk about production. We also have to talk about diets and consumption, which is a much more difficult topic to talk about. People don't like to do it, but it has to be addressed.
Thank you.